The vast alien craft descended from the night sky, its sleek, angular lines glinting in the moonlight as it settled gently onto the barren desert floor. For a long moment, there was silence, save for the faint hum of the alien vessel's engines. Then the stillness was shattered by the roar of military jets streaking overhead, their weapons systems primed and ready. Within minutes, the once peaceful desert was swarming with armored personnel carriers and heavily armed soldiers, forming a defensive perimeter around the alien ship. At the center of the commotion stood Captain Michael Rodriguez, his steely gaze fixed on the enigmatic craft. As the commanding officer of the elite U.S. Special Forces unit tasked with first contact, he knew that every second counted. "Sir, we have the area secured," one of his lieutenants reported, breathless from the sprint to their position. "The president is on the line and demands an update." Rodriguez grabbed the radio handset, his voice calm and measured. "Mr. President, this is Captain Rodriguez. The alien vessel has landed in the New Mexico desert, just as your intelligence briefing indicated. My men have the area surrounded, but we have not yet made contact with the occupants." There was a momentary pause on the other end of the line, then the president's voice, tinged with both apprehension and resolve. "Captain, you have your orders. Establish communication with the aliens, but do not let them leave. We need to understand their intentions before they're allowed to depart." "Understood, sir." Rodriguez clicked off the radio and turned to his men. "All right, listen up. The president wants us to make contact with our new friends, but I don't have to tell you that we can't let them leave until we know what they're up to. Tread carefully, but be prepared for anything." Waving a hand, he gestured towards the sleek alien craft. "Move in, but maintain your distance. I want snipers on those hills and air support on standby. Let's show these aliens that they're not the only ones with advanced technology." The soldiers sprang into action, taking up strategic positions around the perimeter. Rodriguez watched, his fingers tightening around the grip of his assault rifle, as a hatch on the alien vessel slowly began to open. A collective hush fell over the assembled troops as a pair of slender, humanoid figures emerged, their movements slow and deliberate. The aliens were clad in shimmering, iridescent robes, their features delicate and almost ethereal. Rodriguez felt a surge of unease. These beings were nothing like the hulking, tentacled monstrosities that science fiction had conditioned him to expect. They appeared almost fragile, vulnerable, and that made them all the more dangerous. Raising a hand, he called out in a clear, authoritative voice, "This is Captain Michael Rodriguez of the United States Special Forces. You are trespassing on American soil. Identify yourselves and state your purpose, or we will be forced to take action." The aliens paused, their luminous eyes scanning the assembled human forces. For a moment, Rodriguez thought they might simply turn and retreat back into their ship. Then one of the figures raised a hand in a gesture of peace, and a series of melodic, otherworldly sounds began to emanate from the vessel. Rodriguez tensed, his finger hovering over the trigger of his rifle. "Hold your fire," he barked, his eyes narrowed. "Let's see what they're up to." The alien sounds grew in volume and complexity, and Rodriguez couldn't help but feel a strange sense of fascination. It almost sounded like communication. He exchanged a puzzled glance with his lieutenant, who shrugged uncertainly. Suddenly, a series of holographic images began to appear in the air between the humans and the aliens, depicting what appeared to be a vast, sprawling city, one unlike anything Rodriguez had ever seen. Gleaming spires of crystal and metal seemed to reach up towards a vibrant alien sky, while below, throngs of humanoid figures moved with a graceful, synchronous rhythm. As the images shifted, Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine. The city was now in ruins, its once gleaming structures reduced to rubble, and the figures lay motionless on the ground, their luminous robes stained with dark, viscous fluid. The aliens seemed to be pleading, their expressions a mixture of desperation and fear. Rodriguez could almost feel the weight of their unspoken message. "Help us." The captain held up a hand, silencing his men as they began to murmur and shift uneasily. "Hold your fire," he repeated, his voice low and thoughtful. "I think they're trying to communicate." Turning back to the aliens, he spoke in a clear, measured tone. "We understand that you are in distress. Tell us, what has happened to your people?" The aliens' response was a flurry of frantic gestures and more holographic images, depicting scenes of devastation and chaos. Rodriguez's brow furrowed as he tried to piece together the puzzle, his mind racing with possibilities. Were these beings refugees, fleeing from some unspeakable horror? Or were they the vanguard of an alien invasion, softening up the human defenses before launching a full-scale assault? Either way, one thing was clear. The fate of the world might very well hang in the balance of this first critical encounter. Rodriguez steeled himself, knowing that every decision he made in the next few moments could have far-reaching consequences. The tense standoff between the American forces and the alien visitors stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Captain Rodriguez stood his ground, his eyes never leaving the strange, ethereal figures as they continued their desperate attempts at communication. "Sir, the President is on the line again," his lieutenant murmured, holding out the radio handset. "He's demanding an update and wants to know if we've established contact." Rodriguez hesitated for a moment, weighing his options. On one hand, he could brief the President on the situation and request further instructions. But something about the aliens' body language and the haunting images they had shown suggested that time was of the essence. "Tell the President we've made contact, but the situation is complex," he said, his voice low. "I'm going to try and establish direct communication. Advise him to stand by." Flipping the switch on the radio, Rodriguez stepped forward, raising a hand in a gesture of peace. "All right, let's try this again," he called out, keeping his tone measured and calm. "I'm Captain Michael Rodriguez of the United States Special Forces. We mean you no harm, but we need to understand what's brought you to our world." The aliens seemed to hesitate for a moment, exchanging a series of hushed, melodic exchanges. Then one of the figures stepped forward, raising the slender hand in a placating gesture. Suddenly, a series of holographic images flickered to life once more, this time depicting scenes of a sprawling, futuristic cityscape, one that seemed to be the same as the first, but in its prime. Rodriguez felt a twinge of awe as he took in the alien architecture, the graceful, flowing lines, and the sheer scale of the metropolis. As he watched, the images shifted, revealing a scene of utter devastation. Buildings crumbled, fires raged, and the streets were littered with the bodies of the alien inhabitants. Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine as he took in the carnage. The alien figure then gestured towards the ruined city, its expression one of profound sorrow. A single word, spoken in a resonant, musical tone, seemed to echo through the desert air. "Calthrin." Rodriguez frowned, trying to make sense of the unfamiliar term. "Calthrin," he repeated, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Is that the name of your homeworld?" The alien nodded solemnly, its luminous eyes filled with a deep, haunting pain. More images flashed before Rodriguez's eyes, depicting scenes of a vast, alien fleet descending upon the city, raining down destruction and chaos. "You're refugees," Rodriguez murmured, his heart sinking as the realization dawned on him. "Your home has been destroyed, and you're seeking sanctuary here on Earth." The alien figure nodded again, a faint glimmer of hope flickering in its gaze. It gestured towards the human soldiers, its movements graceful and measured, as if pleading for understanding and assistance. Rodriguez felt a pang of sympathy, but he also knew that the stakes were impossibly high. These aliens, whatever their intentions, represented an unknown threat, one that the United States government would be wary of embracing with open arms. Turning to his lieutenant, Rodriguez spoke in a low, urgent tone. "Get the President back on the line. Tell him we've made contact, and the aliens are requesting asylum. But make it clear that we need direct orders from the highest levels before we can proceed any further." The lieutenant nodded, his fingers tightening around the radio handset as he relayed the message. Rodriguez turned back to the aliens, his expression grave. "I'm afraid I can't give you an answer just yet," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "The decision to grant you asylum rests with the President and the United States government. For now, I'm going to have to ask you to remain here, under our observation, until we can determine the best course of action." The alien figure seemed to deflate, its shoulders slumping in resignation. Rodriguez felt a twinge of guilt, but he knew that he had no choice. The safety and security of the American people had to be his top priority. As the alien ship remained grounded, and the human and alien forces eyed each other warily, Rodriguez couldn't help but wonder what the future might hold. Would these refugees prove to be allies, or would they be the harbingers of a new and terrifying threat? Only time would tell, and Rodriguez knew that the decisions he and his superiors made in the coming days could very well shape the fate of the entire planet. The tense standoff between the American forces and the alien visitors stretched on for days, as the President and his top advisors debated how to proceed. Captain Rodriguez maintained a constant vigil, his men keeping the alien craft under close observation while diplomatic channels remained open. However, as the negotiations dragged on with no clear resolution, tensions began to mount within the administration. Some officials, driven by a combination of fear and political ambition, argued for a more aggressive approach. "We can't just sit on our hands while these aliens have us at their mercy," fumed one hawkish senator during a heated Oval Office meeting. "Who knows what kind of advanced technology they're hiding in that ship? We need to take action before they have a chance to turn it against us." The President, ever the cautious statesman, tried to calm the waters. "We must proceed with caution," he argued. "These beings appear to be refugees, not conquerors. Rushing into a confrontation could have disastrous consequences." However, the senator was unmoved. "Caution be damned. The safety of the American people is at stake. I say we give the order to seize that ship by force and see what secrets it holds." Sensing the growing divide in the room, Rodriguez knew that he needed to act quickly before the situation spiraled out of control. Ducking out of the White House, he placed a series of furtive calls, setting his plan in motion. Within hours, a covert team of highly trained operatives had infiltrated the perimeter around the alien craft, carefully avoiding detection as they made their way towards the vessel. Under the cover of darkness, they used specialized tools to bypass the alien ship's security systems and gain access to the interior. Once inside, the operatives began a systematic search, cataloging every piece of technology they could find. Carefully, they downloaded data from the ship's onboard computers, hoping to uncover the secrets that the aliens refused to share. But as the team made their way deeper into the alien vessel, they stumbled upon something that made their blood run cold. In a dimly lit chamber, they discovered a group of the slender, ethereal aliens, huddled together in what appeared to be a state of deep meditation or hibernation. Exchanging alarmed glances, the operatives knew that they had crossed a line. This was no longer simply a matter of gathering intelligence. They had violated the sanctity of the aliens' own space, an act that could have devastating consequences. Hastily, they retreated, making their way back to the surface with their stolen data. But as they emerged from the ship, they were met with a sight that chilled them to the bone. The alien craft had come alive, its sleek, angular lines now pulsing with a menacing energy. The operatives barely had time to react before a blinding beam of light lashed out, striking one of the support vehicles and reducing it to a smoldering husk. Chaos erupted as the human forces opened fire, their weapons seemingly ineffective against the alien vessel's advanced shields. The alien craft retaliated in kind, unleashing a barrage of devastating energy blasts that tore through the American defenses with ease. Captain Rodriguez, alerted to the situation, raced to the scene, his face etched with a mixture of fury and dismay. "Cease fire," he bellowed, his voice barely audible over the deafening roar of the battle. "Hold your positions." But his orders came too late. The alien ship, its patience exhausted, unleashed a final devastating salvo that reduced the entire American encampment to rubble. Stunned, Rodriguez could only watch as the vessel rose into the sky, its powerful engines shaking the very ground beneath his feet. As the alien craft disappeared into the distance, Rodriguez knew that the delicate balance had been shattered. The tentative diplomacy had given way to open warfare, and the stakes had been raised beyond measure. Turning to his battered and bruised troops, Rodriguez knew that their moment of reckoning had arrived. The aliens had shown their hand, and the American military would have to respond in kind. "Get me the president," he growled, his eyes narrowed with determination. "It's time we showed these extraterrestrial bastards what happens when you mess with the United States of America." As the damaged American forces regrouped, the news of the alien attack sent shockwaves through the highest levels of the U.S. government. President Elizabeth Carlson wasted no time in convening an emergency meeting of her top military and intelligence advisors. "Gentlemen, the situation is dire," she began, her normally calm demeanor betrayed by the tension in her voice. "Captain Rodriguez has reported that the alien craft has eluded our forces and escaped into the upper atmosphere. We must assume that they now possess knowledge of our defensive capabilities and will use that against us." One of the Joint Chiefs, a 4-star general with a steely gaze, leaned forward in his seat. "Madam President, we cannot allow this insult to go unanswered. These aliens have demonstrated hostile intent, and we must respond with overwhelming force to protect American lives and interests." The president nodded, her expression grim. "I agree. Captain Rodriguez, you will have the full support of the United States military at your disposal. I want that alien craft located and neutralized as soon as possible." "Yes, Mom." Rodriguez saluted sharply, his eyes burning with determination. "My men are ready to engage the enemy. We'll show these aliens that they've picked a fight with the wrong planet." Within hours, the skies over the American Southwest were alive with the roar of fighter jets and the thunderous reports of missile launches. Rodriguez's elite Special Forces unit, bolstered by the might of the U.S. Air Force, launched a relentless assault on the elusive alien craft. But the alien vessel proved to be a formidable opponent, its advanced shielding and weaponry deflecting the human onslaught with ease. The pilots maneuvered with lightning-fast reflexes, evading the American missiles and raining down devastating energy blasts that tore through the human defenses. As the battle raged on, the American forces began to suffer heavy casualties. Pilots were shot down, tanks were reduced to smoldering wrecks, and the ground troops found themselves outmatched and outgunned at every turn. Gritting his teeth, Rodriguez knew that they were running out of options. "Damn it, what does it take to bring down that thing?" he growled, his knuckles white, as he gripped the radio handset. "Sir, we're running low on ammunition and our air support is taking heavy losses," his lieutenant reported, his voice tinged with desperation. "If we don't turn the tide soon, we're going to be overrun." Rodriguez's mind raced, searching for a solution. Then a glimmer of inspiration struck. "Lieutenant, get me a line to the president. I have an idea, but it's going to be risky." Moments later, Rodriguez was on the phone, his voice urgent as he outlined his plan. "Madam President, we need to bring in the big guns. I'm talking the full might of the U.S. military. Bombers, artillery, everything we've got." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Then the president's voice, tinged with a hint of trepidation. "Captain, you understand the stakes here. If this fails, we risk incurring catastrophic casualties, both military and civilian." "I know the risks, Mom," Rodriguez replied, his tone resolute. "But we have to try. These aliens have shown us that they're not playing by the same rules as the rest of us. If we don't respond in kind, we could lose everything." The president let out a long sigh. "Very well, Captain. You have the green light. Bring in the full force of the United States military. Show these aliens what we're made of." Nodding grimly, Rodriguez relayed the orders to his lieutenants, and within minutes, the skies were alive with the thunder of heavy bombers and the roar of artillery barrages. The alien craft, caught off guard by the sheer scale of the human assault, struggled to maintain its defenses. Slowly but surely, the American forces began to chip away at the alien vessel's shields, their overwhelming firepower gradually breaking through the advanced technology. Rodriguez watched, his heart pounding as the alien craft began to list and falter, its once graceful lines marred by smoking gashes and crumbling sections. In a final, desperate act, the alien craft unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, raining destruction down on the human forces below. But the Americans refused to be cowed, responding with a devastating salvo of their own that tore through the alien vessel's weakened defenses. With a thunderous roar, the alien craft finally succumbed, plummeting to the ground in a shower of sparks and debris. Rodriguez watched, his face grim, as the smoldering wreckage crashed into the desert, leaving a massive crater in its wake. For a long moment, there was silence, save for the crackle of radio chatter and the distant wail of emergency sirens. Then, a cheer went up from the battered but triumphant American troops, their fists raised in a defiant salute. Rodriguez allowed himself a weary smile, knowing that the battle had been won. But as he surveyed the destruction around him, he couldn't help but wonder what the future might hold, and whether the next encounter with these alien invaders would prove even more costly. As the alien vessel lay in ruins, its once sleek exterior reduced to a charred and twisted wreck, the leadership of the extraterrestrial visitors found themselves in a state of utter disbelief. Their initial optimism, born from the belief that their technological superiority would allow them to easily overwhelm the primitive human civilization, had been shattered in the face of the Americans' overwhelming firepower and tenacity. "This cannot be," murmured Calvith, the head of the Calthran diplomatic mission, as he surveyed the devastation through the makeshift command center they had hastily established. "We vastly underestimated the capabilities of these humans and the lengths to which they would go to defend their world." Beside him, Sarlith, the head of the Calthran military, let out a weary sigh. "It seems we have met our match," he said, his voice tinged with a rare hint of resignation. "Their weapons, their tactics, their sheer determination, it is beyond anything we had anticipated." Calvith nodded grimly, his brow furrowed in deep thought. "We must reevaluate our approach," he said, his tone decisive. "Clearly, brute force and overt displays of power will not be enough to subdue these humans. We must find a more subtle way to understand them, to learn their weaknesses, and to exploit them to our advantage." Turning to his subordinates, Calvith issued a series of orders. "Dispatch covert teams to observe the human civilization from within. I want to know everything about their society, their culture, their leadership. Leave no stone unturned." The Calthran officers sprang into action, their movements efficient and precise. Within hours, teams of highly trained operatives had infiltrated the human population, blending seamlessly into the fabric of American society. From the bustling streets of New York City to the corridors of power in Washington, D.C., the Calthran agents observed, listened, and gathered intelligence. They studied the humans' social dynamics, their political systems, their military capabilities, and their technological advancements, all the while careful to avoid detection. As the days turned into weeks, a clearer picture began to emerge. The Calthran leadership was shocked to discover the sheer depth and complexity of human civilization, a far cry from the primitive warlike culture they had initially assumed. "These humans are more than just savage warriors," Sarlith remarked, his tone tinged with a newfound respect. "They are innovators, thinkers, artists, a species capable of remarkable achievements." Calvith nodded, his expression pensive. "Indeed, and therein lies both their strength and their weakness. Their capacity for violence, for ruthless aggression, is matched only by their capacity for creativity, for ingenuity, for adaptability." The Calthran leader paused, his gaze fixed on the images and data streaming in from his covert teams. "We must tread carefully," he said, his voice low and measured. "These humans are not to be underestimated. If we are to succeed in our mission, We will need to employ every ounce of our own cunning and resourcefulness." As the Calthran leadership pored over the intelligence gathered by their operatives, a new plan began to take shape, one that would require not brute force, but a more subtle and insidious approach. "We will not meet them on the battlefield," Calvith declared, his eyes gleaming with a newfound determination. "Instead, we will infiltrate their society, sow discord and mistrust, and turn them against one another. Only then, when they are weakened and divided, will we strike." Sarlith nodded, a grim smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "And when we do, we will show them the true might of the Calthran. They may have won this battle, but the war is far from over." With their new strategy in place, the Calthran leadership set their sights on the human world, their focus unwavering as they prepared to launch their most ambitious and most perilous operation yet. The fate of both civilizations now hung in the balance, as the humans and the aliens engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse, each side determined to outmaneuver and outsmart the other. In the months following the disastrous first encounter between the Americans and the alien visitors, the Calthran leadership put their newly devised plan into motion. Eschewing overt displays of force, they instead turned their attention to more subtle and insidious methods of undermining the human civilization. Under the watchful gaze of their covert operatives, embedded deep within the fabric of American society, the Calthran orchestrated a series of carefully coordinated cyberattacks. These strikes, targeted at the very heart of the human military and technological infrastructure, were designed to cripple the Americans without ever revealing the true nature of the threat. One by one, critical systems began to fail. Communication networks went dark, power grids collapsed, and even the vaunted American missile defense system faltered, leaving the country vulnerable and exposed. Captain Michael Rodriguez, now elevated to the rank of colonel, found himself at the center of the chaos, his brow furrowed in a mixture of confusion and growing dread. "What the hell is going on out there?" he growled, his eyes fixed on the flickering display screens as his command center struggled to maintain control. "We're not sure, sir," his lieutenant replied, her voice tinged with urgency. "It's like the entire system is under attack. Communications, logistics, even our weapons platforms. We're blind, and we're bleeding." Rodriguez cursed under his breath, his hands clenching into fists. He had known that the defeat of the alien vessel would not be the end of the conflict, but he had never anticipated an assault of this magnitude, a crippling blow that struck at the very heart of American power. "Where's the president?" he demanded, his gaze sweeping across the frantic activity of the command center. "Holed up in the White House Situation Room, sir," the lieutenant replied. "She's convened an emergency meeting of the Joint Chiefs. They're trying to figure out how to respond." Rodriguez nodded, his expression grim. "Then I need to be there. This isn't a problem for the military alone. We're going to need the full might of the federal government to fight back against this threat." Leaving his command center, Rodriguez raced towards the nation's capital, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and possibilities. Who, or what, was behind these devastating attacks? And how could they hope to defend against an enemy that seemed to possess such uncanny knowledge of their own systems and defenses? As he arrived at the White House, Rodriguez was ushered into the tense confines of the Situation Room, where the president and her top advisors were already deep in discussion. "Colonel Rodriguez," the president greeted him, her voice tight with concern. "I'm glad you could join us. We're in the midst of a crisis, and we need your expertise." Rodriguez nodded, his expression grave. "Madam President, I've been briefed on the situation. It's clear that we're facing a sophisticated and coordinated attack, one that's targeting the very foundations of our military and technological capabilities." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled leaders. "And I believe I know who's behind it. The alien visitors we encountered in the desert." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room, and the president's eyes narrowed. "Are you certain, Colonel? What evidence do you have?" Rodriguez leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "The precision of these attacks, the way they're exploiting our vulnerabilities, It has the hallmarks of the alien technology we encountered. And the timing, coming so soon after our clash in the desert, is no coincidence. The president nodded, her expression grave. Then we have no choice but to respond in kind. Colonel, I'm authorizing you to assemble a task force, the best and brightest we have, to hunt down these alien operatives and put an end to this threat by any means necessary. Rodriguez straightened, his jaw set with determination. Understood, Madam President. I'll get my men mobilized immediately. We'll show these aliens that they've made a grave mistake in underestimating the United States of America. As Rodriguez departed the Situation Room, the weight of his responsibility settled upon him like a heavy mantle. The fate of the nation, and perhaps even the world, now rested squarely on his shoulders. With a deep breath, he steeled himself for the battle ahead, knowing that the stakes had never been higher. This was no longer just a question of national pride or military might. It was a fight for the very survival of his species, and he was determined to ensure that the humans would emerge victorious, no matter the cost. The conflict between the human forces and the alien Calthran invaders had now escalated to a full-blown war, with neither side willing to back down or accept defeat. As Colonel Rodriguez and his specially assembled task force launched a relentless counteroffensive against the Calthrans' covert operatives, the two civilizations found themselves locked in a deadly game of cat and mouse. The American military, bolstered by the latest advancements in cybersecurity and electronic warfare, fought tirelessly to regain control of their compromised systems and defend against the Calthrans' crippling attacks. But the alien invaders, with their superior technological capabilities and intimate knowledge of the human infrastructure, proved to be a formidable adversary. Day by day, the battle raged on, with both sides suffering significant casualties. The Calthrans' stealthy infiltration tactics made them elusive and difficult to track, while the Americans' brute force approach was often thwarted by the aliens' advanced countermeasures. As the conflict dragged on, the human population grew increasingly unsettled, their faith in the government and the military shaken by the ongoing instability and uncertainty. Tensions flared, with some calling for a more aggressive response, while others advocated for a diplomatic solution. Colonel Rodriguez, caught in the middle of the political and social turmoil, knew that he had to find a way to break the stalemate before the situation spiraled completely out of control. But with the Calthrans' relentless onslaught and the growing division within the human ranks, the path to victory seemed increasingly elusive. In a last-ditch effort, Rodriguez convened a meeting with the president and her top advisors, laying out a bold and risky plan. Madam President, we can't keep fighting this war of attrition. We need to take the fight directly to the Calthran, to strike at the heart of their operation and cripple their ability to continue their attacks. The president listened, her brow furrowed in thought. And how do you propose we do that, Colonel? Our forces have been stretched thin, and we're struggling to maintain control of our own systems. What makes you think we can pull off an offensive of that scale? Rodriguez leaned forward, his eyes intense. We've been playing defense for too long. It's time we took the initiative and caught the Calthran off guard. I've been studying their tactics, their weaknesses, and I believe we have a chance to turn the tables on them. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the assembled leaders. But it will require the full support of the federal government, the military, and the American people. We need to rally the nation, to show these aliens that they're up against more than just a few soldiers and spies. The president considered his words, her expression contemplative. Colonel, you understand the stakes here. If this operation fails, we risk incurring catastrophic losses, both on the battlefield and on the home front. Are you prepared to take that risk? Rodriguez didn't hesitate. Madam President, I am. We have to end this conflict before it destroys us from within. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to protect our country and our people. The president nodded, a glimmer of steely resolve in her eyes. Then you have my full authorization, Colonel. Mobilize the troops, rally the nation. Do what you need to do to defeat these alien invaders once and for all. With the president's blessing, Rodriguez set his plan in motion, working around the clock to coordinate a massive coordinated strike against the Calthrin's network of operatives and support systems. He knew that the stakes had never been higher, that the fate of the human civilization hung in the balance. As the American forces prepared to unleash their offensive, the air grew thick with tension. Both the humans and the Calthrin knew that this would be the decisive battle, the ultimate test of their respective strengths and strategies. The world held its breath, waiting with bated anticipation for the outcome of this epic clash between two civilizations, one determined to defend its home, the other driven by a desperate need to secure its own survival. The stage was set, and the future of the Earth hung in the balance. The battle that followed was unlike anything the world had ever seen. As the American forces unleashed the full might of their military and technological prowess, the Calthrin invaders found themselves pushed to the brink of annihilation. Strikes and counterstrikes rippled across the global stage, with critical infrastructure on both sides crumbling under the relentless onslaught. Communication networks faltered, power grids collapsed, and even the vaunted space-based defense systems were rendered useless in the face of the aliens' advanced jamming capabilities. For weeks, the conflict raged on, with neither side willing to back down. Casualties mounted on both sides, and the human population grew increasingly desperate and fearful, many calling for a negotiated settlement, even as the government remained steadfast in its determination to defeat the alien threat. Finally, after a particularly devastating series of exchanges that left much of the continental United States in ruins, the Calthrin leadership realized that they had reached a point of no return. Their forces were depleted, their resources dwindling, and the prospect of total annihilation loomed ever closer. Calvith, the Calthrin diplomat, convened an emergency meeting with his military counterparts, his face etched with a mixture of resignation and regret. "We have no choice," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his words. "We must seek a ceasefire, a negotiated settlement with the humans. The alternative is unacceptable, the complete destruction of our people." Sarlith, the Calthrin military commander, bristled at the suggestion, his eyes narrowing with barely contained fury. "You would have us surrender, admit defeat. After all we have sacrificed, all we have endured." Calvith held up a hand, silencing the other's protests. "It is not about surrender, Sarlith. It is about survival. We have underestimated these humans, and the cost of our folly has been devastating. We must adapt, we must find a way to coexist, or our entire civilization will be wiped from existence." Reluctantly, Sarlith nodded, his shoulders slumping in resignation. "Very well. But know this. The moment they show weakness, the moment they let their guard down, we will strike. We will not forget this humiliation." Calvith inclined his head, his expression grave. "Understood. Now, let us contact the human leadership and see if we can find a path forward that benefits us both." Across the ocean, in the war-torn heart of the United States, Colonel Rodriguez sat in the Oval Office, his face etched with a mixture of relief and trepidation as the Calthrin's offer of a ceasefire was relayed to the President and her advisors. "This is an opportunity we can't afford to miss," the President said, her voice firm. "The American people have suffered enough. If we can secure a lasting peace, it will be worth the concessions we might have to make." Rodriguez nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. "Madam President, I agree. But we must be cautious. These aliens have proven themselves to be cunning and resourceful adversaries. Any agreement we reach must be ironclad, with clear terms and consequences for violation." The President's gaze was steely. "Precisely, Colonel. That is why I'm putting you in charge of the negotiations. You know these aliens better than anyone. Make sure they understand that we will not be trifled with, and that the next time they threaten the safety of the American people, we will not hesitate to unleash the full force of our military might." Rodriguez straightened, his expression resolute. "It will be done, Madam President. I'll make sure these Calthrin know exactly what they're up against." In the days that followed, The negotiations between the human and Calthran representatives were tense and arduous, with both sides vying for the upper hand. Tempers flared, and there were moments when it seemed that the fragile ceasefire would collapse and the war would resume in earnest. But ultimately, a compromise was reached, one that established clear guidelines for future interactions between the two civilizations and laid the groundwork for a cautious and gradual process of cultural exchange and technological collaboration. As the dust settled and the shattered cities began the long process of rebuilding, the people of Earth found themselves grappling with a newfound sense of both wonder and trepidation. The realization that they were not alone in the universe had shaken the very foundations of their existence, and the scars of the conflict would linger for generations to come. Yet, there was also a glimmer of hope, a recognition that, despite their differences, the humans and the Calthran shared a common drive for survival and a desire to understand one another. With time and patience, perhaps the two civilizations could find a way to coexist and even to thrive in the vast expanse of the cosmos. As for Colonel Rodriguez, he watched the proceedings with a weary but resolute gaze, his mind already turning to the challenges that lay ahead. The battle might have been won, but the war for the very future of humanity, had only just begun.